Every woman has a story, and within every Christian woman is a God story. Join your host, Cheryl Brodersen, and rejoice with her in the glorious work of God as she interviews today's woman of faith.
Hello and welcome to today's faith. You know, some people never outgrow their past. They're never able to get victory or to change or to move forward. Well, my guest today has had experiences that would make others just stay or be paralyzed, unable to move forward. But because of Jesus Christ, my guest, Maria Kessler, has been able to not only overcome, but to be victorious in so many different areas. So I'm excited for you to meet Maria. So, Maria, thank you so much for being on Today's Faith.
Thanks for having me.
And I know we were talking before, and you said that you're ready to tell your story.
I am.
I'm so excited. So you were not raised in a Christian home.
No.
And in reading your testimony, there was abuse in that home too, or abuse that came to you as a child.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So, kind of a painful upbringing, or
Just more of a broken home.
Mm-hmm.
There was, my parents divorced when I was older, but they had a lack of relationship when I was younger. And because of that, just the turmoil in the home greatly affected me.
Right.
And just kind of grew up feeling that I wasn't worthy enough or not good enough, or that I wasn't loved or not a part of something, and carried those lies with me for a long time.
So deep insecurities.
Major insecurities.
And
yes.
I've noticed that watching high school girls, that makes them behave a certain way, trying to get approval,
Absolutely.
and even sometimes being very controlling. Or how did it affect you in high school?
For me, high school was probably the hardest point of my life. That was, I would say, for me personally, the lowest that I was, looking for all the voids that I felt inside in boys and alcohol and whatever it was that I could find that I could rebel with, and just all the bad things that I shouldn't have done.
Well, I had a friend in high school who was like, she was really nice. We were in kind of the AP classes together. And one day she came in and she was sobbing because her parents were getting a divorce. She kind of pulled me aside because I was like the Christian.
Yeah.
Everybody like, oh, there's Cheryl, the Christian. So when people had problems, they'd come to me. When they wanted to have fun, they stayed away from me.
Yeah.
But when they had problems, they came to me. And I remember her just sobbing. And then after that, just this rebellion, just this,
Yeah.
why should I care?
Absolutely.
Why should I care? And so I've seen those effects. So you got a job after high school flying in the airlines, or?
Well, I went to college for a year. I was a vocal performance major, and
wow.
ended up getting nodules on my vocal cords.
No.
And that was how I identified myself, was as a
Right.
singer. So it's like a football player who breaks a leg and can't play anymore. And the opportunity opened up for me to go apply for this job as a flight attendant, and I got it. And I think it was probably the greatest thing I've ever done, because it removed me from where I was, and God used that to start working on me to change me into who He was calling me to be, even though I didn't know it till years later from that time. But I just see His hand at work in that. And
Anyone share the Lord with you during this time?
no.
No.
Mm-mm.
Did you have any clue about God or Jesus, or any thoughts about?
Yeah, I did. I grew up Catholic, so it wasn't completely a home where there was no religion or anything taught to us. I went to private Catholic schools, but I never was taught to understand the relationship with Jesus Christ,
Right.
and knowing that. So that was the difference. So I knew there was a God. I believed that there was a God, but I didn't understand just the vast power of Him in our life.
So it's during this time before you're saved that you meet your husband, right?
Yes.
Okay, tell me a little bit about how you met him.
So my husband had a friend that his mother was a flight attendant for the same airline that I was working for. And she was working with my roommate. We had just started in Chicago, and my roommate was telling this woman, we didn't know anybody there, and she said, oh, I'll have a guy I know come take you out.
Oh.
Well, this lady was in her 50s, and we were 19, 23 years old, so we're thinking this man in his 50s is going to come take us out, and she didn't want to go by herself. And I ended up working a trip and was delayed and got sent home because of weather. And he was 2 hours late coming to pick her up. So I got to go and meet him. And I didn't care one bit for him when I met him.
Oh, really?
And he just was really annoying to me. And at the end of the night, I told my roommate that I was going to marry him. And she thought I was crazy.
He was annoying and you were going to marry him.
There was just something in me. I told her, I said, I know, but I think this guy is going to be my husband.
That's crazy.
Yes.
That's
yes.
absolutely crazy. You know, you almost see God working even, I mean, looking back, do you see God working even in that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that funny how you can look and see that he was proactive even before you knew him?
Yes.
Okay, so how long did you date? How long before you got married?
So we dated a year and we were engaged, and then we had a year-long engagement and got married a year after that. And so it'll be 12 years this August.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So now you got married, and it's after you got married that you came to know the Lord. Tell me a little bit about how that happened.
I have known the Lord now. I gave my life to the Lord 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago. And when we moved out here, no fault to him completely. It was both of us. We both grew up in homes where we were not given a very good representation of what marriage was supposed to be and how it was supposed to look like. And we didn't have the Lord. So it was a mess.
Yeah.
And we got pregnant with our first child, which is a total shock because my husband being a testicular cancer survivor, those odds were very slim. And our son was born with a genetic disorder. And that was really, really hard. You know, he kind of distanced himself, my husband, because it was too overwhelming for him and stuck himself in work full time. And so here I was at home with this baby who needed so much, and it was overwhelming, completely overwhelming. And about a year and a half later, I found out we were pregnant with our second. And during that time, we were going through just a very tumultuous time in our relationship. I was ready to file for divorce. I told him that if I was going to be a single parent, I might as well legally be a single parent because everything was too much for him. And we decided to move into a home. We had tried to buy 5 homes in Southern California, and I see God working in that, why we did it, because we probably wouldn't have it today. And we moved into a home that was completely contaminated with toxic mold. Lived there 30 days, 35 days.
How'd you discover the mold?
My son had pneumonia twice in 30 days.
The one with the genetic?
The one with the genetic disorder.
Wow.
And he was very susceptible to sicknesses. And we kind of had a feeling that something wasn't right. And then after, 3 weeks, you look up and there's this puddle in the ceiling. And it was, the water had been turned off for a while. Long story. They knew about it, didn't tell us about it. And it was so bad that the doctors told us that if we would have our next baby and bring him home, he probably wouldn't survive throughout the night because his lungs wouldn't have been able to hold it.
Oh, my goodness.
And so we moved into a hotel because we, in the middle of the night, had to leave. So here we are, our whole life savings that we saved for our house gone because we're fighting in court. And it was a mess. And I just remember driving. I would drive along the side of the road and I would pull over and I would just sit there and sob because I didn't have hope. I didn't have Jesus. And here I'm looking at my son who has all these problems and they're telling me is going to continue to have even more health issues. And not long after that, I have another baby coming that I don't know if he has the same thing or not. And I'm overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. And a girl that I didn't really know invited me to church. And I thought, what the heck? What can I lose at this point? And I received the Lord that day. I'll never forget it. I was one who didn't have a lot of emotion. I didn't cry in front of people, and I couldn't stop crying the entire time. I say this in all seriousness and silly, but I had snot just dripping to the floor, that embarrassing snot bubbles crying. And at the end of service, they gave an altar call, and I gave my life to the Lord. And a woman came up to me at the end and just asked me if she could pray for the health of my baby. And that was it. I felt Jesus at that moment completely touch my whole body from head to toe, and there was no turning back for me at that moment.
Okay, now I'm curious. I have a friend, and she gone into church, and the pastor said, you can be forgiven and have your past completely wiped out and a new start today. And that's what she heard, and she ran up the aisle. What was it that touched you and made you go forward?
I think for me at that moment, it was more of I can just let this load down. You
Go
know,
bear
'cause,
this burden.
yeah, I didn't have to carry all these things on my shoulder anymore, that there was this amazing God who loved me enough that he was going to take that for me.
Right.
Even just, it makes me want to cry now.
Yeah.
It just was so powerful. It wasn't even a thought of my own personal emotional issues or things from the past. It was more, here I'm looking at my kids.
Right.
And, I want nothing more like any of us mothers for our kids
Right.
not to have to struggle.
Right.
And I thought, okay, Lord, I'm just going to give them to you and trust you with them. And
I love
it was powerful.
Isn't it? I mean, I personally, you're talking about before, you're hopeless on a road,
Yeah.
pulled over, just like, what do I do? I don't know how people do life without Jesus.
I don't either.
Because for me, the ability to pray and put in the Lord's hands. Today I was walking and the Lord has this thing with me about, I look at trees and the Lord always says, can you make a tree? And I'm like, I can't even make a tree. How am I going to handle dinner? And the idea that God makes trees,
Absolutely.
he came up with the whole concept of photosynthesis. And I mean, a tree is one of his minor works.
Yes.
And then he did them in all sorts of different varieties. And to me, that just, again, says, he can handle it.
Absolutely.
So he takes over. How did he begin to handle your life?
Well, at that moment, I just decided I didn't even care what my husband thought, that I was
Wow.
just going to do this. And he thought I was a nutcase.
Did he really?
Every Sunday, I would invite him to church, and he's like, yeah, good luck with that. And I just got to see the Lord work in such a powerful way from that point on in our life and our kids' life. And it was Mother's Day not long after I got saved, and my husband said, I don't want people to feel sorry for you at church by yourself with your, you're pregnant. I'm like, honey, they do not
And your
feel sorry for
handicapped
me.
child, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. He had no idea. And God just completely blew his doors off. And he didn't receive Christ right away. It was a walk. It was a while.
But he kept going with
But
it.
he kept going with me.
Wow.
And it wasn't until our oldest was 4. And at this time, he was fully coming to church, fully involved, and he had chosen to give his life to the Lord, but he still kind of had one foot in and one foot out. It was like the Lord said, okay, either take my hand or don't. Like, you can't be in the world and not in the world at the same time. And our oldest son, at that time, I was now on the worship team at the church, so I had to be at church.
So the nodules were healing then.
Yeah. So I can, my voice.
You can use it
It's
for the
different
glory of
how
the
it
Lord.
used to be, but yes, exactly. God gave me that gift to use for him, and now that I know that, I can use it for him.
It's not your identity, it's
Absolutely.
his. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay.
And
That's one victory.
I know.
Well, I think we're up to 3 or 4.
Exactly. So I was at church. It was a Saturday night, and my son has suffered multiple seizures, and we have no explanation as to why. And he had one of the worst seizures. He completely turned blue, lost his bowels, and my husband called me panicking. And luckily, we were only 2 blocks from the church. I jumped in the car, flew back. We went to the hospital. They ended up admitting him that night because he had another major seizure in the hospital. And they put him in isolation and said they needed to find out what was wrong. And that night, when he was asleep and my husband was asleep, none of us were going to leave his side. We were all right there.
Right.
I just said, Lord, what is this? Like, what is this? What are you doing in all of this? And I opened to the story of the man on the hill when the Lord went up to him and cast the demons out to him, into the pigs. And I'm like, why are you showing me this? Like, what does this mean? I can't just wake my husband up and say, hey, I know you're not fully all into this yet, but this is what the Lord's telling me, and I don't know what it means. And then the next morning, I woke up and I said, okay, Lord, you need to just make this clear to me. Like, what do you want us to do? And I opened the story where the parents had the boy that had the seizures, and they bring him to Jesus. And I thought, okay, like, you want us to pray over him. You want us to bring him to you. But I think more importantly, my husband, to let go of that and give it to the Lord. And so that night we prayed over our son, and during the time we were praying, he looked at my husband. He was 4 years old, and he said, Mom's hurting me. She's hurting me right now. Tell her to stop. And my husband's like, he's 6'5", bigger than life. He's going to take down anybody who lays a finger on our children. He says, no, honey. And then he looks at my husband again. He says, Dad, who is God? Tell me, who is God?
Oh, my goodness.
And he's just kind of, tripping over his words. And, a little bit later, my son looks at him and he says, Daddy, Jesus doesn't love me. He doesn't love me. And my husband said at that moment, he was like, I am out of here. And he gets up to walk out, and he heard the Lord audibly tell him to engage. And he turned around and he grabbed a hold of us, prayed for the first time over his family. And my 4-year-old sat up and said, Daddy, Jesus just healed me. I want to be baptized. I want to live for Jesus. And from then on, our lives have just been completely transformed.
Oh,
Yeah.
my.
Yeah.
Good.
Amazing. Amazing.
So, how did it transform your marriage?
Well, it was a work in progress. I think mostly because both of us decided to just surrender everything that had happened in our lives personally just over to the Lord. And I had to let God work on me. I couldn't be looking to my husband anymore to fill that emptiness inside. I had to trust that the Lord was going to do that for me. And it just was a process, a step-by-step process. But I think that moment, that is such a defining moment for our life, not only as a couple, but for our family, because at that moment, we saw, we could feel, we could touch the power of God in our life. And we knew that it didn't matter about anything else in the world, that God had a hold of us. And I even have a plaque on my wall at home that I made, and I just continue to list everything. It's like this checklist of everything God has done. But at the beginning of it, I said, when the world says no, God says yes. Because that's how we live our life. Because he has the final say, no matter what anybody says. My son was born deaf and he can hear. He was supposed to be blind and he can see, and he had a heart defect that has miraculously been healed. And it just, us watching God be so faithful in everything, it's just changed our hearts towards the Lord, and in turn has changed our hearts towards one another. And I have a marriage and a family that I always wanted, that I always wanted to be a part of. And
that's so different than what you grew up with.
Absolutely.
And, this ability to go to God in prayer. Okay, so what other things did God say yes when the world said no?
Well, I think for me, if I just look at my life personally, just growing up feeling that sense of not belonging. And I'm sure many people would look at my life and say, what are you talking about? You're crazy. But inside, I was this broken little girl, where things had happened in my life where, I have this picture that as we're little, we all think we're princesses, because we are. We're God's princess. And as we go through life and we don't have the Lord, these things are stripped from us, or they happen to us, they scar us and they damage us, and we no longer see ourselves as God's beautiful daughters. And God completely transformed that in my life. And there was a time where I was just in worship and prayer. We were at this worship conference or something, and during that time, I just had my eyes closed, and the Lord just took me back to this time, and I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it was Easter Sunday, and I'm in my Easter dress, and I'm spinning, and I'm like, why are you showing me this, God? And then he starts to show my heart at 7 years old, and just how sad and how broken, and how I just wanted someone to look at me and tell me I was beautiful and that they love me. And I'm like, why are you showing me this? And he said, because I want you to know that I love you, that I delighted in you, that I was with you. And then he continued to take me kind of on this neat little journey where he takes me to this field, and how you kind of just usher along your kids, and I just felt his hands on my back, and I go into this field, and I'm leaping and I'm dancing and I'm singing, and I can hear him just laughing, and he's just telling me how much he loves me and how much he cares for me, and that I am his daughter. And all these flowers start popping up everywhere, and I'm grabbing them and just throwing them, and he's like, I have all of this for you and so much more. And then he told me at the end of that, it was Joel 2:25, just the very beginning is just what I remember and what I hold, is that I will restore to you what the locusts have taken. And that is what he's done for me. And in that moment, I got to start to see myself, how God sees me, as his daughter, as beautiful, as, unblemished and not scarred, and worthy in his eyes. And that's amazing. That's an amazing feeling when you live your whole life not knowing what that's like and not feeling that, And so for me personally, that's what he's done in my life. And then just to watch in each of my children, every single one of my kids has their own story of what God's already done in their short little lives. And, my middle son, during my pregnancy, I kept having issues, and they thought I was having miscarriages. And every time I would go in, and he was completely fine. He doesn't carry the same genetic disorder. Neither of us are carriers. And just the fact that I got pregnant again, we were so excited. And then my daughter, we had written on a canvas going into New Year's Eve of 2012 what we were asking the Lord for. And I wrote on it that the Lord would grow our family and that we would have a daughter. And that year, I got pregnant. And I was so excited, and we decided to take the boys with us to the ultrasound. It was this whole new experience because this is our first baby where we're both saved, and it's just a whole different dynamic in our home. And we went in, and they started the ultrasound, and they stopped and asked my husband to take the kids out. And there was no heartbeat, and the sac was completely irregular. And the doctor said, I'm so sorry, but this pregnancy is not viable. You're going to have a miscarriage. And but I knew what the Lord had told me. And even though I did cry, I'm not going to lie, I didn't sit there and go, oh, God's got this. No, I was upset, And then my husband's reminding me, we trust in the Lord. And we went back 2 weeks later, and the sac was in perfect formation, and our heartbeat was strong. And it wasn't long after that I had this dream every night where I would walk into the room in my home where I have a chalkboard, and written on it said, "Girl, God has answered."
Wow.
And that's what her name means. God has answered. He gave us what we asked for, what the desires of our heart was.
And what's her name?
Anaya.
Anaya.
May
How did you find that name?
Well, I searched what name means God has answered.
I love that.
Google.
Google, really?
Yes.
That's incredible.
And it's in the book of Nehemiah.
Excellent.
Yes. So just this little one time, but still, it's just amazing. We had never heard of it, and it's beautiful. It fits her completely. She's a total gift from God.
So now you have this ministry with worship.
Yes.
So how long did you receive that ministry after coming back to the Lord?
So it was probably about 6 months after I received the Lord. Every time I went, I just felt that pressing. And part of it was hard for me because that was how I identified myself for so long of my life, that it was such a fine line for me.
Right.
And I started on the worship team, and then our church went through many transitions. We went through 3 different pastors in 3 years.
Yeah.
And so eventually it was kind of like, okay, Maria, can you lead worship? Just kind of happened because everybody was leaving and coming and leaving. And I remember very specifically there was a time where there was someone there that my whole life I wanted approval from. And they were at church that day.
Oh, my goodness.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, finally, they can see me and I can get their approval. But I'm in the back before I went up on stage to start worship, and I just was like, no, Lord, I don't want to do this for them, because obviously that's what I wanted for so long, and that's what damaged me so much. And I'm like, I want to do this for you. I only want to do this for you. And that was the first time I know for sure that when I went up to worship, that every ounce of me was just given over to the Lord. And I didn't even look at the person. I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to just keep my eyes on the Lord. And that was a huge defining moment for me, of knowing that this was a gift the Lord had given me just for him. And I don't need anybody else's approval because I have his. So
that's so amazing. The Lord speaks to you, and in your this worship leader, for how, if you were to tell somebody who came into the church, how would you explain worship to them? Because, obviously it's a concept. Before you got saved, you did not understand it.
No,
And singing was performance.
It was performing. Absolutely.
What's the difference?
Oh, my gosh.
How would you explain the difference to somebody?
There's a huge answer for that question.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. It's just this, I guess when I think of worship, this morning as I'm listening to the music, I'm in tears because every word you think of what God has done, I think of what God has done in my life, and how every word you hear in these worship songs, how it just brings us back to the heart of Jesus, that we are his children, that he loves us, that he desires for us to be with him, and that he really does have so much for us, no matter what we've done. And to me, it's like this just expression where I can just give every part of me back to him. It's how I know to show my love back to the Lord. And just every part of me, my whole body wants to just give to him. And yeah, it's not just about singing a song or reading a words on page, or it's more of just your whole heart and soul and every part of your emotion, just handing that over to him and praising him for everything, everything.
So now, how is your husband, like, what do you guys, how are you guys involved? How is he involved? You're part of the worship.
Yeah.
What's his, like, ministry now?
He just finished we go to Calvary Chapel San Clemente, and our pastor, Holland Davis, did a 2-year school of ministry on Sundays, and he just will be graduating from that. So he is just kind of on his own little journey in there watching. I don't think he quite sees yet how much God is working through him, but as his wife to sit on the side, I get to see that, and it just makes me giddy with excitement. He's so powerful. He is he's so gifted with speaking to people. We can walk anywhere, and we're there for an hour, and the kids are like, oh, he's telling them about Jesus again.
That's incredible.
So, yeah, I mean, and he really speaks into families' lives. I think his heart was just so changed by realizing, like, the importance of what a gift he's been given, having a wife and children, and he wants other men to know what gifts that they have. And I just see God use him in so many ways in that. We do a family ministry once a month. We do family night, because his heart is that parents would come back with their children and do things together, get down on the floor and play with their kids.
So is that a private family night, or is that like
it's through the church?
Okay, tell me, like, if I have a family and you're inviting me, tell me what goes on, and maybe we could, send out. Maybe there's people in San Clemente watching this, or Dana Point, who would want to go to that family night. So
absolutely,
we'll get a shout out.
Yeah, we the second Saturday of every month, we have a list on the website for San Clemente.
Oh, perfect.
The Calvary Chapel San Clemente.
Okay, what's the www Calvary Chapel
San Clemente
.org?
I think.
Perfect. Okay.
I should have known that.
Is it? Perfect. Okay. So www.calvarychapelsanclemente.org. Okay.
Yes. And under family ministries, so we do the second Saturday a month, and we do different things. So we'll do bonfires at the beach, where we'll take time and worship. My husband always does some kind of little, Bible lesson for the kids and the families, and we do worship, and then we just have fun. We just play together and just, live life and fellowship. And yeah.
Now, how old are your children now?
My oldest, Austin, is 9. Luke is 7, and Anaya just turned 2.
Okay, now what is happening with your oldest? Because he's still special needs.
He is.
So what are his needs?
It's more of now most of his health things, we've completely just kind of surpassed those. So there's not been any health issues. We haven't had any seizures in over a year and a half, which praise the Lord for that, because those are so scary. Health-wise, he's doing really, really good. And at the beginning of his life, that was what was a huge part of his issues, was a lot of health things. It's more of sensory. He's very intelligent, but he just needs to be in a setting where he can work at his pace. If he needs to go and jump on the trampoline for 5 minutes because he is starting to get that anxiety, or he needs to get the wiggles out, he can go get his wiggles out, and he has like an aversion to paper and buttons. So it's more just sensory things, but they really affect him and how he can function day to day in his life. So just helping him to work through that.
So how did, coming to the Lord, like, help with directing for him? Because, I mean, here, when you had this special needs child, you didn't know what to do. Again, we're going to go back to the side of the road where you don't know what to do. And now you come to the Lord. And how did the Lord direct you?
With him, there's just this sense of peace raising him. I think at first it was so overwhelming because I didn't understand anything. I was scared. And, the doctors tell you all these things. And now we just kind of take one day at a time. Like, I don't fret about things with him. I don't get scared. The doctors have told us there's a percentage of these kids, because of the chromosome that's affected, they can have schizophrenia or bipolar problems and things like that. And I could sit here and panic about that and cry about that, but what good would that be? Like, I need to live life now with my son. And I think that's what God has given me, is that we have today. We don't know what tomorrow brings. So we're just going to live today and have fun. And I don't look at him as he has a disability, I look at him as he's my kid and he's amazing. And, you hit those bumps in the road where you're like reminded, okay, he has to do this a little differently. I forgot. But yeah, it's just it's very peaceful. It's not overwhelming anymore.
And now, you said your husband was disengaged from the family.
Yes.
Disengaged from the trial, and now he's leading this family night.
Yeah.
So obviously there was a journey involved.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about his journey and, the steps, kind of how God brought him to this place.
Well, I think at first it started with a lot of nudging from other, godly men who would kind of come into his life, and they're like, "What are you doing? Like, come on, like, step it up." And he's like, "Why is everybody like on me all the time?" And then in that, he will walk in obedience. If the Lord asks him to do something, he will do it. Even if he is kicking and screaming, he will do it. And then it's just so fun to watch God just completely change his heart. So that's kind of just been the journey, watching from my end of what God's done with him. It's just God has brought these amazing men alongside of him that have just really constantly encouraged him and just poured life into him that makes him want to be a better man and want to be a better husband. And he's a great guy. He wasn't this horrible, terrible person.
No, just detached.
Yes.
Just a workaholic. Probably.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, for workaholic, though, to all of a sudden take notice of his sons, and how do you see him making an investment in your sons?
He is just there. He's there for them. He doesn't miss anything. It doesn't matter what it is. If he has something going on at work and there's an event at school, he will make sure that he is there. However he has to do that, he will be there for them. And it's just awesome. He doesn't miss anything.
Now, you said, there's so many things, Cheryl, that the Lord's doing in my life. I don't know, how we're going to get to all of them. So tell me about one that we haven't touched on.
Well, there's just one recently that we're super excited about. We've gone through so many trials in our life, and God has been so good and brought us out of that. But it's not always bad. It's not always these tough, hard times. There's times that we just get to rejoice and watching God just bless us. And we have lived in California for about 12 years and have been wanting to buy a home for 12 years, and nothing has happened. And we wanted a home in San Clemente. We wanted 4 bedrooms. We had our whole checklist of everything we wanted, and everyone said, "You're not going to find that for the price that you can afford, because we live in California."
Right. And San Clemente.
Absolutely. And we found a property, and it was a complete repossessed, really bad shape.
Disaster.
I didn't even want to look at it. My husband walks in and he goes, "This is our home." And I looked at him. I'm like, "You're crazy. I'm not going to live in this." And they had given it to somebody else. The bank did. And not long after, that person withdrew, and they called us. And we said, okay. I said to my husband, I go, "You know what? Let's just let God be God and see. At this point, we don't want to get in the way of what God's doing, and we want him to be the one to say yes or no." And we put an offer in on this house, and they accepted it. And my husband, we both were kind of panicking, because we thought every penny we have is going to go to this home just to buy it.
Right.
He's like, "You're going to have to live with cabinets falling off, the wall, and holes in the wall, and dirty carpet.
But at least no mold."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No mold, and we own it. It's our
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, Lord, are you sure you want to give this to us? And the day we signed on the line, we went over that night and walked in, and complete just shock and awe. It was being remodeled.
No.
The whole house is being completely remodeled.
How?
Well, we found out, we were able to share our testimony in a local magazine in San Clemente last year.
Oh my goodness. Not a Christian magazine.
Not a Christian magazine.
What was the testimony? I mean, about the Lord?
It was just the Lord, everything he's done in our life. They did like a 5-page article. We were on the front of the cover, and we almost didn't do it because we thought, we don't really fit in this whole like San Clemente style of, they're not going to want us in this magazine.
Oh my goodness.
And we didn't know that the realtor had taken that article and submitted it with our offer.
No.
And the asset manager of the bank that was in charge of the repossessions, he read the article and was so touched by it that he said, I have to give this to these people, and we have to do this work that was contracted because of the other buyers.
Wow.
And we had made a list of everything that we wanted to do, and every single thing on that list has been taken care
Oh my
of.
goodness. So when's your move-in date?
Well, we close escrow either today or tomorrow.
Oh, how exciting.
So exciting. And next week we'll be moving in.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yes.
Okay, so a friend of mine, speaking of articles, sent me this article one time, and it was about the very scripture in Joel that you were mentioning about the locusts.
Yeah.
And they were saying that after the locusts come through and destroy crops, that they actually create this fertilizer in the soil that strengthens the crop. So not only do you get a better crop, a stronger crop, but you get a more abundant crop. So I want you to tell me a little bit about how you see those things that the locust has eaten coming back stronger, more abundant. That, just like kind of, this was a broken place, and this is what God did. This was, just give me a couple of those.
Absolutely. I think for me, my own, just how I looked at myself, how that is just because of what had happened to me, different abuses as a child. It really affected me in such a negative way, and how God has just taken that and completely restored me and rebuilt me from the inside out of just this place of at peace with who I am, comfortable in my own skin, and being completely filled by Him, and just seeing the complete, opposite of who I was and who God wanted me to be. Absolutely. For my family, I now have a family that I always dreamed of as a kid, a husband and a wife that have this amazing relationship.
Actually love and like each other.
Absolutely. And I get to see my kids have a home where they feel comfortable, they're at peace, where it's a happy place, where they're filled, and that was just completely opposite from how I felt when I grew up. So those would be, I think, the two biggest things for me. And a marriage. I mean, I didn't know what a marriage was supposed to look like. All I knew it was a mess. And to see God take that and that whole idea of what I understood a marriage to be and give us what it's supposed to be is just awesome. We have this amazing foundation on the Lord in every area of our life.
Now, with women, you're not alone coming from the brokenness. You're not alone with the insecurities.
Absolutely.
Have you had the opportunity to share your testimony and actually help other women?
Yes, yes. And it was terrifying at first. I had been asked to come 2 different places, and one was like a pregnancy resource center. And at first I'm thinking, why would they want me? I didn't have, a baby or a young or an abortion or anything. And then I'm realizing that's not what it's about. Like, what it's about is, kind of what I touched on before. So many of us as women have had things in our life that have happened that have caused us to look at ourselves as just ugly and not worthy. And that was such an honor. There was one girl, and I will just cherish this moment forever. She gave her life to the Lord that night.
Wow.
And I thought, I'm walking in here thinking, what am I doing? I can sing in front of people. I'm terrified to talk in front of people. It's completely different. And it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm just so grateful because I know if God can do that for me, He will do that for anybody.
So have you also had like one-on-ones, like this is my, you've seen that girl and you thought, that's me.
Yeah.
And I want to meet her. I want to talk to her.
Yeah. Well, that's what I did.
Oh.
It was a group. And afterwards, I went up to her because I just kept watching her the whole time thinking, I need to go talk to her. And that was so terrifying.
Yeah.
I just talked to everybody. Really, God? You want me to go one-on-one? And that is when I walked over to her and just shared even more and just asked her about her life. And she started sharing and just very similar, not necessarily how life was lived, but just that hurt and that brokenness and that void and that emptiness inside. And in turn was able to offer her, the hand of Jesus, and she took it. So
that's awesome. Obviously that's the prompting of the Lord. And it was something that you didn't feel before you were saved.
yes.
So how did, when was the first time you remember feeling, I know salvation going forward, but the promptings of the Lord? And and then how did you learn to respond to those?
I think I was just talking about this earlier. I'm so naive when it comes to just this whole Christian walk. I really am. I mean, I don't walk in with any expectations in anything I do, and I thank God that is just how he has worked in me. I'm ready and along for the ride. I'm kind of a fly by the seat of your pants girl.
Well, you were a flight attendant, so there you are.
Absolutely. Um, it really wasn't long after I was saved. I mean, I look back and think, really, should I have been ministering to these people? I was still a total mess, but I'm still a mess. I'm a work in progress,
All of us. All of us.
And yeah, I just right away when I started to realize like how much God loved me and feeling that fullness of Him, I knew that I wanted to tell every single person that I met, like, you don't have to be stuck. I know what it's like to be in that deep, dark hole of hopelessness, and I don't want anybody else to be there that I know and love. And so it was not long after receiving the Lord that I just kind of would start to, okay, I'm just going to share. I'm just going to talk. And it started with, I would be somewhere and I would just hear the Lord, like, you need to go pray for them. I'm like, what? I was scared to even pray. I remember going to church and we'd hold hands and they're like, Maria, would you like to pray? I'm like, I didn't even know what to say. So yeah, it's just been amazing.
That is so great. Now, people will come to the Lord and they might have a gift like singing, but they hold back on it.
Yeah.
How did you actually, did you go up and tell them I can sing, or did someone hear you sing and say you should be up there? What happened?
I was sitting in church one Sunday, and I just remember sitting there watching the worship team and just feeling like, I want to do that. Like, I want to go sing. And there was definitely still that part of me. I was like, oh, they should hear me sing. Like, I can sing good. I can do this. That whole performance side of me who didn't really understand the whole concept of worship yet. And I remember walking up to the worship leader at the church, and I said, by the way, like, I have a background in singing, and I would love to join the worship team. And he said, okay, well, let's give it a while, because he knew I was so new. And I think it was just like 4 or 5 months later, he finally was like, okay, you wanna come sing and see.
So then did he approach you?
Yeah.
Okay.
A couple months later, he came back to me after I had kind of expressed interest, and then invited me to come and I guess audition, if you will.
But see, that's amazing too, because some people, when they feel rebuffed the first time, they're like, well, let's find a new church where they'll let me sing. But you stayed there and just began to grow.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it just goes back to that naivety again. I just, like, okay, here I am. I don't really know any other churches. I mean, this is where I was invited. It was a Christian church. It's where I gave my life to the Lord, and everything was just kind of going in the right direction. So I didn't want to leave.
Too, I mean, you came from this background where, it's secular music. So the songs are either about, a love that you lost, a love that you want, and then you're coming in and you're singing songs to the Lord, and these lyrics are totally new.
Yeah.
And how did, what was the difference?
Well, I don't think I realized the difference at first. At first, it was like, oh, I get to sing. And then
with people.
Yeah, and I'm saying these words. And then I think just slowly it just, as you're saying that, it just starts to sink into your heart. And it's a major difference. You just see that you're not just saying empty words, that you're actually praising the Lord, that you're actually giving thanks to Him, that you're in those words, you're even surrendering parts of your heart to Him, and just walking through that was powerful for me, because I think not long after, I just didn't listen to secular music anymore. It was all worship. And, I'd go in someone else's car and they'd have just secular music on. I'm like, what are you listening to? Like, I never realized how offensive some of it can be, and how, now I'm like, this is what God's given us. He's given us music to praise Him, to worship Him. And that just sounds silly to me now,
Really, and really the I believe, like you said, the purpose of music is to glorify God.
Yeah.
To sing to Him so that He might have pleasure with the sound,
Absolutely.
with the praise, with the beauty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you feel that pleasure when you're singing?
Oh yeah, I always like in the back of my mind. I always think about that time where he just took me on that journey where I was in that field, and I can just hear his laugh. And just there are times in worship where I'm just in that. I'm in that with him, and I'm in that place again, and I can just hear him laughing, and just that proud like father of how much he loves me and how proud of me he is, and absolutely just knowing that he is just, you look at your kids and they give you a little flower even if it's dead, and you're like, this is the most beautiful thing.
Yes.
Like, I feel like that's God. That's how he's looking at us. He's just like anything that we give him, especially in worship, he is just eating it all up.
I had a woman on here just last week, and she was saying that the Lord spoke to her, and she said, there's that love that you want from your mother, there's that love that you want from your father, there's that love that you want from your children. And she said, in the same way that we want that love from that person,
Yeah,
that type of love, that's how God wants the love from us individually. And I was like,
absolutely.
I like that.
That's awesome.
So, when you were invited, and, I know that we asked you to be on this program. What was the thing that was burning on your heart? Like, if I could say anything, kind of like, this is my message. This is the message I feel compelled to, or the story I feel compelled to share.
Absolutely. I think it would be to just sum it all up in one big pretty bow would just be that God restores. That, I said this earlier, when the world says no, God says yes. God's yes is yes. And he writes the story of our life. And it doesn't matter what we've done or what has happened to us, that is not who we are. God says who we are. And that he will take everything, every good, every bad, and he will take that to make us and change us into how he sees us.
So now, how do you and your husband now handle altercations? Because, before he would just kind of walk away. And we know that altercations, differences of opinion, don't change just because we're saved.
No.
Like we said, we're ruined sinners, saved by grace.
Absolutely.
So how do you deal with those altercations now?
It's so different. Oh my gosh. Praise the Lord. It's so different. We absolutely have our intense times of fellowship, as we jokingly
I
like
love
to call
that. I love that. I might use that with my husband.
That's okay.
Yes.
And, one of us will always come back and apologize. And I think that is just the biggest thing. We have our moments, and there are times where he just makes me mad, and I don't even want to look at him. But I think we both, at the times when we have these intense fellowship times, we know if we've done something wrong. And God is so good to not let us walk away and not do anything about that. I know for me, I always feel compelled to turn back around and apologize, and he is the same way. And so it doesn't end on this big yucky, fight. It's like, okay, and then we get to a conclusion of whatever it is that we need to figure out.
Now, the hurts that you grew up with, they were caused by other people. I mean, people come in and they're what hurt you. And you and I both know that one of the greatest lessons in Christianity, and one of the things that sets you free, is forgiving.
That's huge.
And, forgiveness, again, the apology
Absolutely.
is, part of the forgiveness in marriage. So did you come to a crossroads where you realized you had to forgive?
Yes. And it was really early on, I really felt the Lord telling me there was a specific person in my life that God said, you need to forgive them. So once again, in my not understanding fully what that meant, I called them on the phone.
Oh, my.
To say, I just want to apologize for hating you.
That helps, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're not saved, right?
No.
So
it did not go well.
No.
And I had this expectation that they would be like, oh, well, I'm sorry. And I didn't get that, and it was devastating to me. But that was just a process that God walked me through, and
then you had more to forgive.
Absolutely. And then there was a time that came, there was a very specific day, and the specific person had called me. And when I was on the phone with them, it was like the Lord just took out my heart and put their heart in me. And I couldn't get off the ground. I was just sobbing. And the Lord showed me how broken and how hurt that they are. And in turn, that is why they were the way, or they are the way they are. And at that moment, it completely changed from any anger or any just distaste to complete compassion for this person. And I was able to just completely forgive them and not hold any grudges or hold anything anymore, because my heart breaks for them. They don't know the Lord. And I know how broken and how hurt they are, and I want nothing more for them to receive Jesus. And that is my heart. That is my heart for their life. That's my prayer for them. And that has just been such a powerful thing that God did for me in that moment, because that was a very specific person that I carried so much anger and so much just yuckiness for so long in my life, and not to have that anymore is so freeing.
So now your husband must have had things he had to forgive too and let go.
Yeah.
How did he get to that place?
I think, I wish he was here with me, but his first thing is going to be like, I'm just going to cut off all ties.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just going to shut the door. And he's done that to certain people in his life where he's like, okay, they don't like how I'm living my life, or they have something to say, because we've gotten a lot of heat from, both sides of our life of, oh, you're Christians now? Like, oh, we're like, no, they don't understand.
Right.
And
they just think you've joined the right-wing Tea Party.
Yes,
You're like,
and all of a sudden we're
political.
living.
Right. It's not a political move.
He's always like, they think we drink something, and now we're this happy world. I'm like, no, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
But they don't know that. And so what he has done, what I've seen him do, is he's kind of just shut the door, more of a protection to not allow them
for the
to
family. For
absolutely,
the family.
absolutely, because we have children, and that we are responsible for protecting them. And in that, this is why I love Facebook, because people can still see God working in our lives, even if they've shut the door, or we have done that. And I have seen these relationships that were severed or broken, and by them just watching what God does in our life, their hearts are changed, and these relationships are now opening doors for us to be in relationships again with them. And
that's part of the restoration that the
it's amazing.
Locust State.
Yes. My husband's father passed away a couple years ago, and he had the honor of doing the eulogy at the Catholic service. And it was so amazing, because my husband was terrified. He's like, all these people in my hometown know the kind of person that I was and how I grew up to be. And he's like, I'm going to walk in here and they're going to think, you're just a phony, And it was so neat, because so many people were touched by the message that he gave. And it was the message of Jesus Christ in a Catholic church, that at the end of the service, the priest stood up, and we both grew up Catholic. So we knew what came next. And I'm waiting to do the closing song. I'm like, why is he standing?
So you sang?
Yes. So
Wow.
we just got to share Jesus all over the place. And the priest kind of starts fumbling over his words. We're like, what is he doing? And he goes, I know it's the heart of Jamie and Maria that you all would receive Jesus in your heart today. And I about fell over. The Catholic priest just did an altar call on our behalf.
No.
And at that moment, we just kind of looked at each other. We're like, God, you're so good. I think that was a huge moment for him in that restoration, is he could go back to where he came from, where people knew him as this rough, kind of just all over the place guy, and see what a radical transformation God has done in his life. And
so he was a rough guy. I got the impression he was like a business guy, but he was no.
No, I mean, he has his business hat for sure, but he grew up a jock. He played football, had football offers in college, wrecked on motorcycles, ruined his football career. He did steroids for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And, kind of just played in that other little lane of the fast lane of life. And,
How old was he when he got cancer?
It was before I met him. So he was 28 when I met him. And so he was like 25.
So that must have been devastating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just to see how the Lord even
Yeah.
healing that and bringing that back around. Okay, so you said that your favorite scripture is Joel. What's your favorite song? You're a worship leader. What song, you're like, I want to sing this song?
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace.
So simple, but so powerful and so
Now,
beautiful.
did you know those lyrics before you got saved?
Yes. But I never knew what they meant.
Right.
And it's actually the Amazing Grace with the chorus, my chains are gone, I've been set free.
Oh, that
because
part, yes.
all of that encompasses my life. I once was blind and now can see, and I no longer have these chains holding me down. Like God has ripped them off. So,
Do you ever get to solo that?
oh yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
In my house all the time.
Oh, right, of course. And in the shower.
Yes, yes.
Now, what song did you sing at your father-in-law's funeral?
I sang, what is the title? It's Even Though I Walk Through the Valley of a Shadow of Death.
Oh, well, Psalm 23.
Yes, it's a Psalm 23 song. What is the title
Is
of
it
that
the
song?
John Foreman song?
Oh, no, you never
No.
let go
Oh.
through the calm and through the storm. Yeah.
That's Matt Redman.
Yes, thank you.
I know these songs because I love them too. I mean,
I'm just so bad at names of songs and who sings them, but yeah.
well, and so you've only been doing these new songs for 7 years.
Well, not even that. Yeah.
So that is just absolutely amazing. So we have like 3 minutes left. So, it would be kind of like the last 3 minutes, your last closing, word to women who are out there, maybe who are struggling, with the past or, with that self-image. What
Yeah.
do you want to say to your sisters in Christ?
That there's freedom. That there's freedom from that. That would be just the biggest thing. I have this picture that the Lord showed me of these diamonds at the bottom of a trash bin. And how so many of us look at that. We look at ourselves as, this rock at the bottom of this trash bin. And that God is willing and ready to dig us out of there and clean us off and allow that diamond just to shine so beautiful and bright of how he sees it.
And that reminds me of there's that scripture. God says, when I make up my crown, I will make you jewels
Yes.
in my crown.
Yes.
So, okay, I'm just going to ask one last question and then we'll go. Second favorite song?
My second favorite song?
Because you're a worship leader. We have to
I
get the
know.
songs.
Oh my gosh. That's a hard question. I would say
Right now.
Revelation song.
Okay.
Revelation song is one of my dearest
Oh, right,
songs.
right.
Yes.
And that's Rolls of Thunder.
Yes, it's the one, it's all giving complete glory to God and everything.
I know. Wouldn't that be so exciting to sing?
Yes.
Before it's thrown. Maria, thank you for
You're
coming on,
welcome.
Marie, and sharing your story. It was incredible. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Today's Faith. And again, it's not that God can, which he can, but that he wants to, that he's longing to take all those things and not just change it, but to bring glory out of it, to give you a platform from which to speak with authority into the lives of others because of the past. He glorifies the past. He makes that into that diamond and that jewel and that thing that you can use for his glory. And certainly you've seen that in Marie's life, how God has changed it and turned everything around. And that's what he wants to do for you. And I'm so glad that Marie was able to come on today and share her story with you so that you would know that God is more than able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or think. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Today's Faith.